Good day, my dear students. Welcome to our class on bioethics and sexual ethics. Our topic for today's lecture is about the Church's teaching on marriage and the family. And I shall develop two main parts for this lecture. First is the plan of God for marriage and the family. And the second is about the Christian dimensions of marriage. The Catechism for Filipino Catholics tells us that when the term marriage is mentioned today, one would probably think about the many ethical problems regarding premarital sex, contraception, divorce, and the like. But the teaching of the Church on these individual moral norms can only be appreciated and followed if Christian marriage is truly understood for what it really is. And that is what we would like to do in today's lecture, to try to look at how the Church would enlighten us on her beautiful teaching on marriage and the family. Just to give us an idea of how people would look at marriage today, let us look at some examples. There have been movements to redefine what marriage is. Like, for example, same-sex marriage, to include marriage for same-sex couples. There is this recent controversy about Pope Francis endorsing same-sex civil union. The Vatican came up with a statement that the interview of Pope Francis was taken out of context. The Pope did not change any official church's teaching on marriage and the family. There is this incident about Erika Latour, who fell in love with the Eiffel Tower, and after a wedding ceremony took Eiffel as her surname. This is how some people would redefine what marriage is. In 2012, a Seattle woman by Lonia Aivas was wed to a building set for demolition, and she called it gay marriage because she believed the building had a feminine personality. Joseph Guisot, who took part in an emotional wedding ceremony with his Labrador in the presence of family and friends. And the last example, a Korean man fell in love with this large huggable pillow and married it. Is this an evolution or a deconstruction of marriage? It is from this context that we would like to emphasize about the Church's teaching on marriage and the family. What is marriage? Marriage is the consented union of one man and one woman who are equal in dignity and rights. It is a specific union which is ordered to fostering of mutual love and the generation and education of their possible children. Through this union, the man becomes the husband and the woman the wife. Both of them become spouses. Here we see several important elements about marriage as the foundation of the family. That in every marriage, the consent of each party is important. Without the consent, the marriage is invalid. And the purpose of marriage is for the mutual love of the couples, also for the generation and education of their possible children. Marriage is part of God's plan. God is the author of marriage, and we see in the creation accounts of Genesis that after creating Adam, God realized that it is not good for man to be alone, and so He created a suitable partner for Adam, and that is Eve. A man leaves his parents to become one flesh with his wife. And God blessed man and wife and asked them to be fruitful and multiply. Here we see that marriage is a divine institution. It is a part of God's plan. God is the author of marriage, and God entrusted to marriage the specific goal of procreation. to go forth and multiply. At the same time, marriage is also a human institution, as St. Thomas Aquinas would tell us. Given the procreative faculties of the human beings, nature demands that they should perpetuate and continue their species. So we read from Pius XI, therefore the sacred partnership of true marriage is constituted both by the will of God and the will of man. From God comes the very institution of marriage, the ends for which it was instituted, the laws that govern it, the blessings that flow from it, while man, through generous surrender of his own person made to another for the whole span of life, becomes, with the help and cooperation of God, the author of each particular marriage. We also need to mention that marriage was influenced by our human experience of sin. And what did sin do? Sin introduced discord and division to married life. And in our time, there is separation, divorce, gender violence, hatred among couples. They are the effects of sin affecting marriage and the family. I remember Sister Lucia, one of the visionaries of Fatima, revealed that the great battle will take place in the family. But let us not lose hope, because Jesus redeems us from our sinfulness. Given our fallen nature, God grants the married couples the grace they need to overcome temptations and attacks against the family. If we look at marriage in the Old Testament, we see a growing appreciation of marital love and fidelity. There are several couples in the Old Testament whom we can look up to as models of marital relationships. The love story between Jacob and Rachel, the love story between Tobit and Sarah, the love story between Boaz and Ruth. Marriage in the New Testament tells us that the matrimonial union between man and woman is something indissoluble. Remember that scene in the Gospel where Jesus said, "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. What God has joined, let no man separate." Pointing out that the fidelity of the spouses for each other is part of God's plan for marriage. Let us look at the characteristics of married love. The encyclical Humanae Vitae lists several marks and demands of conjugal love. It is human love, it is total love, it is faithful love, and it is fruitful love. Human love, it's not just an instinct or a sentiment, it is a free act of the will. And true love is to will the good of the other. It is total love because a married person loves generously and shares everything without reservation to his or her partner. It is faithful love, faithful and exclusive love between couples, and fruitful love because the marital act of couples should be open to the possibility of having children. Pope Paul VI tells us that using contraceptives and artificial family planning methods is contrary to the characteristics of married love. It is not a free human love because using contraceptives is like saying that I respond to the sexual urge, I become a slave to the sexual urge. It is not total love because you are holding back the gift of fertility. It is not a faithful and exclusive love because the contraceptive mentality can lead one to multiple partners. Anyway, I will not have any children, so it's okay to engage in a marital act with other persons. It is also not a fruitful love because the contraceptive mentality is not open to life. So here Paul VI again emphasizes married love is a human love a free love, a total love, a faithful love, and a fruitful love. Let us look at the Christian dimensions of marriage. First is marriage as a contract. The church teaching has always regarded marriage as a special contract between a man and a woman, a special contract of permanent union between man and woman entered into in accordance with law for the establishment of conjugal and family life. It is the foundation of the family and an inviolable social institution whose nature, consequences, and incidents are governed by law and not subject to stipulation by the spouses. Civil law affirms the reality of marriage as a contract. In ordinary human contracts, agreements, the conditions are determined by the parties themselves. But here in marriage, the contract are not determined by the parties. It is determined by the law because it is for the good of the society. 3 characteristics of marriage as a contract. Marriage is a permanent union, meaning to say the couple cannot decide for themselves that their marriage is only valid for a certain period of time. There is no expiration date on the bond of marriage. It cannot be dissolved. Marriage is between a man and a woman. Why? Because it is for the establishment of a family. A homosexual marriage cannot achieve this purpose. Marriage is ordained for the propagation of the human species. The matrimonial consent brings about the indissoluble bond of marriage. There should be no force regarding the consent. Couples must understand fully what they are doing, entering into a marriage bond, and this consent, if it is free and done without force, is something that validates the marriage. Marriage as a covenant. Marriage as a love covenant highlights the biblical dimension of marriage. In the biblical tradition, covenant is relationship between God and man. Remember this passage from Exodus, I will be your God and you will be my people. In the Jewish tradition, covenant is an agreement entered into by people themselves. This covenant forms into a relationship which is equal in binding force to blood relationship. Relationship, therefore, in terms of a covenant, does not end. So marriage is not just a contract, it is also a covenant. It is a love covenant. It is like the love covenant of God with Israel. It is God who initiated it, and in the covenant, the faithful partner is always God. God is faithful to the covenant in spite of the infidelities of Israel. And marriage is likened to that. The emphasis on the kind of bond marriage makes between people is not just a temporary bond, but a lasting bond between them. Marriage as a love covenant is actually for the good of spouses and the good of the children. Good of the spouses would refer to the love of the spouses in marriage. The good of the children would refer to the children as the fruit of love of the spouses. They are not seen as burdens, but as gifts from the Lord. And parents must be responsible in taking care and providing the needs of the children in the family. What are some of the properties of marriage as a covenant? Unity or exclusiveness, enriched by the spouse's faithfulness. It emphasizes that Christian marriage is being married only to one partner. It is monogamous, no to extramarital affairs. Indissolubility or permanence, it is enriched by the spouse's struggles for lastingness, based on what Jesus said in the gospel, what God has joined together, let no man separate. No? Divorce has never been part of God's plan for marriage, but marital fidelity for each other. And also openness to fertility, enriched by the fruitfulness in the married life. No? And this emphasizes the procreative good of marriage. No? Openness to fertility means when nothing is done to interfere with the biological rhythm, because not all sexual unions can lead to procreation. There are certain days when the woman is infertile, and the church advocates the use of natural family planning in the proper birth spacing of children in the family. Marriage as a sacrament. In the Latin Rite, the celebration of the sacrament of marriage takes place ordinarily within the Holy Eucharist to signify the mutual offering of their lives for one another, as Christ offered himself for the church and on the cross. It is appropriate, therefore, that couple to be married in church receive previously the sacrament of reconciliation. That is why when I interview couples for marriage, I always tell them that they should go to confession to prepare themselves spiritually for the wedding day. And the proper context really for the celebration of marriage is the Mass, because the Mass tells us about the faithful love of God for us. And God's love is something that the couples must imitate in their relationship of love as husband and wife. The matter for the marriage as a sacrament is the exchange of vows. The formula is the I do of the couples. The minister in the sacrament of marriage are the spouses. The priest or the deacon acts as witnesses. Frequency, only once. Once and to one spouse as long as the spouse is living. You can get married again if the spouse dies. Marriage as a sacrament. The Code of Canon Law emphasizes this, the importance of the matrimonial consent. The husband and wife-to-be must be free to be able to give matrimonial consent. To be free means not being under constraint and not impeded by natural or ecclesiastical law. Free consent means a human act by which man gives himself to the wife. I take you to be my wife. Likewise, the wife gives herself to the husband. I take you to be my husband. That is why the canonical interview of couples before marriage, one of the goals of the interview is to determine if the consent is really free. If the consent is not free, then the marriage is invalid. Marriage as a sacrament. Mixed marriage is a marriage between a Catholic and a baptized non-Catholic Christian. In the Latin Rite, a mixed marriage needs for liceity the express permission of the ecclesiastical authority. So it happens that the couples entering into marriage, one of them is a baptized non-Catholic and one of them is a Catholic. And for the marriage to take place, they need to secure dispensation from the bishop. A marriage with disparity of cult is a marriage between a Catholic and a non-baptized person. An express dispensation of the impediment is required before celebrating the marriage. And both parties must agree to respect the essential ends and properties of marriage and the baptism and education of children in the Catholic Church. The same is true also with disparity of cult. When one party is a Catholic and the other party is a non-baptized person, they must secure dispensation from the bishop and they must promise that their children will be baptized and will be raised up in the Catholic Church. What are the effects of the sacrament of marriage? The marriage bond. And the bond between spouses is by its very nature perpetual and exclusive. The marriage bond has been established by God in such a way that a marriage concluded and consummated between baptized persons can never be dissolved. So the marriage bond is one of the effects of the sacrament of marriage. And also the grace of the sacrament. In a Christian marriage, the spouses are strengthened by the grace of the sacrament. The grace proper to the sacrament of matrimony is geared towards the perfection of love between the spouses. It strengthens their indissoluble unity. This special sacramental grace leads them to holiness in their life and to educate well their children. Of course, it is never easy in every marriage, in every experience of the family. There is no perfect family, but if couples do their best to be faithful to the vows they made before the Lord, then the grace of the sacrament of marriage can help them overcome difficulties in family and marriage life. As a vocation, marriage is a call to parenthood. The focus is on the sacred duty of spouses to share in God's procreative act and to form their children to become fully human and thereby to be full partakers of the divine life. As a vocation, some are called to married life, some are called to single blessedness, some are called to priestly and religious life. What's important is that one must discern very well where God is calling him or her and prepare for it. If priests and religious would take years of formation as part of their preparation, the same is true also with married life. Married couples must prepare very well before entering into married life. There is bliss in marriage, yes, but there is also suffering that calls for sacrificial love. This call involves carrying the cross because the spouses themselves can become crosses to one another. It is true in every vocation there is a cross, there is a challenge presented to us. But let us remember that the crosses that we encounter in life, they are not ends in themselves, they are opportunities or means to fullness of life. We can learn from the challenges we experience in life in order to become better persons. So that ends our lecture for today. Keep safe, everyone.